Welcome, everyone, to Color Commentary. We are your Pauper commentators, Michael Petchik and Adrian Gonzalez. How's it going, Adrian?
Oh, good.
Is this our thing now, or are you just going to keep saying it at a higher and higher tone every week?
Oh, it's good, but every time he says it, it gets faster.
Oh, God. So I didn't get to play any Magic this week because Boston is currently snow locked, and it's still uncertain as to whether or not I'm going to work tomorrow. So fun times.
There is no magic. There is only Zool.
You were telling me that Pauper's not doing so well in Austin either.
I used to play a lot of Modern, and it's looking like that's the only format that Wizards really cares about anyway. So we're back on the Modern train.
I don't know if you've been on the internet, but I don't think most of the people playing Modern agree with you on that because they just cut a lot of Modern sport.
Oh, I guess it's time to play Legacy
or Frontier. I don't know.
I want to play that. I don't want to play Frontier.
No, that's a completely fair thing to say. I've mainly just been like working on cube stuff because it's always there and I can keep working on it forever and never be finished. But
I didn't realize there was an Eldrazi Frontier deck. I might play that. I have all these cards.
Yeah, you probably do. You probably have almost all of them, and the ones you don't are probably $1 at most. But moving into the world of Pauper-related news, I don't know if you saw this, but if you'd like to venture down to the state of New Jersey, anyone listening,
up for me,
or up, or just travel
wherever.
To the what is it? The Garden State? Is that their official slogan? But GP New Jersey on just pulling up the dates here so I can get this all right. March 10th to the 12th of this year. On the Sunday, it's hosted by Channel Fireball. They are doing a Pauper event.
Channel Fireball is doing a Pauper event?
They are doing a side event at one of their GPs in New Jersey, and it's $20.
No way.
It's $20 to enter, and there's no other details. I would probably assume they're going by the Mitgo legality list and ban list. But if you're in the area, go ahead. Go experience New Jersey.
Oh, that's awesome. That's a big step. That means that if Channel Fireball does it, that means more people might do it.
Yeah, I would hazard a guess that this is them, dipping a toe, seeing how it goes and seeing what the response is. It's certainly progress, right? Like they are, I would say top 3 biggest vendors of Magic online.
Dude, yeah, and they're definitely my favorite people to watch.
Oh yeah, they've got some quality content. But continuing on, today we have a thematic deck tech that might not make sense until we get into the rest of the content we got for today. And this is a Jund Lands deck that a friend of the show, Alex Ullman, posted a while back and tooled around with quite a bit. And it basically just runs a bunch of neat land synergies, right?
So lands is traditionally a legacy. I would hazard it out and say it's a control deck with sort of a combo we finish. Where you control the board using all sorts of utility lands, and it's unique in that it breaks a lot of the rules regarding lands, where it plays a card called Exploration, so you can play more than one a turn, and the lands double as both protection, threats, and ways to hinder your opponent. So it's a very interesting deck. It's definitely one of my favorite legacy decks, even though I've never actually played it, just because the play style is so legacy. You don't really see a lot of other formats where lands are at the center of the deck. Even a deck like Scape Shift, which ostensibly uses lands to win, still relies on actually casting a Scape Shift to win, whereas lands, the legacy deck relies mostly on its lands. But I'm getting too far away here. The point is, this deck seeks to do the same thing, but we're in the limitations of Pauper, and so a lot of those sweet utility lands aren't actually in the deck.
Yeah, this is a lot more kind of leveraging effects based around lands.
Right.
we're not like dark depths of Vesuviing here. We're using stuff with retrace. We're using weird cards from Planar Chaos. Like there's some deep cuts here. And let's start with the creatures. Oh man, I'm gonna pronounce this wrong, but I don't know if anyone's ever made a pronunciation guide for it. Fa Adiasir.
I was going to say, Mike, I'm pretty sure it's pronounced Battlefield Scrounger. Sorry, keep going. Fight us here. Go ahead.
So Fayadasir is a weird card. It is a reprint. It is a color shifted reprint of, I believe it's a card called Sinbad, from Arabian Nights. So it's 1 and a green for a 1/1 human shaman, and it has tap, draw a card and reveal it. If it isn't a land card, discard it. And this is kind of a spicy little number in this, because as we go, you'll see that a lot of stuff in this deck has either, retrace, or it is useful if it goes to the graveyard. So this is kind of a 2-mana creature that taps to draw a card.
Can I just say, I looked up Sinbad, and I'm sorry. September 25th, 2006 ruling on Sinbad says, to avoid confusion, reveal the card you draw before putting it in with the rest of the cards in your hand.
Yeah,
what? Of course.
It's a very strange card. I don't know why it's not like, I don't know why it's not phrased as like reveal the top card of your library. If it is a land, put it in your hand. If not, put it into the graveyard. But okay.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Anyway, I just couldn't believe that was actually a ruling on this card. Keep going.
But in this deck, with enough stuff that's useful in the graveyard and enough lands, and trust me, there is a high land count here. This is kind of just draw a card a lot of the time, and that's pretty unprecedented in this format.
Right. And yeah, it's good. It's good.
Yeah, so we've got 3 copies of that in here. Moving on down, we've got 2 copies of Crypt Rats, 2 and a black, 1/1 rat, pay X, and X can only be black mana, deal X damage to each creature on the battlefield. This is kind of the win con here, We've got enough lands. There's ways to recur these creatures, and you know what? Sometimes just repeatedly killing the board works.
That's interesting that you say that, because I would actually think that one of the later creatures, Battlefield Scrounger, is the primary win condition, although you can totally win with Crypt Rats.
Yeah, maybe I'm just coming at this from a more grindy position. Next up, we've got 4 copies of Tilling Treefolk, 2 and a green for a 1/3 Treefolk. When it enters the battlefield, return 2 lands from your graveyard to your hand. So this lets you refuel with more lands for assorted effects, and it's just kind of good in this list where you're already pitching a bunch of lands and accidentally kind of getting them into the graveyard and other manners.
Right. There's a bunch of discard oriented spells that we'll get into, a bunch of retrace spells that are really sweet. And then, sorry, I'll let you continue. But yeah, there's definitely ways to get lands in the graveyard, and then we're using them to fuel these spells.
And so the only other 2 creatures in the list, and that is kind of one of the deck's sort of soft spots, if you will, it's got very few creatures, is Battlefield Scrounger, which is 3 green for a 3/3 Centaur, and it has Threshold. Put 3 cards from your graveyard on the bottom of your library. Battlefield Scrounger gets +3/+3 until end of turn. Use this ability only if there are 7 or more cards in your graveyard.
There's Threshold. So
yeah, it's a weird one. It stops you from ever milling, right? As long as you can, unless you get your graveyard exiled, it just stops you from milling. And
right, and we've seen this card come up as a win condition in control decks more than once.
There was a Turbo Fog list that 5-0'd with it.
I saw it in a Snow Go list.
It is a pretty ultimately dirtily card. It just kind of stops you. It makes sure that you can't lose from milling yourself, and it presents a clock. And with
you also have to put back relevant cards into your deck.
Yeah, you do get to kind of say, all right, I have no cards in my library. My next 3 turns are going to be this. Seems good. And the fact that there's 2 of them means you can loop them with one another, which is kind of just added bonus value. Moving into spells. So let's start off with all of the retrace stuff. Raven's Crime and Flame Jab. Raven's Crime is a black for a sorcery. Target player discards a card, and it has retrace. And retrace reads, you may cast the spell from your graveyard, and you discard a land as an additional cost to cast it. Note, this does not exile the spell. And Flame Jab is just 1 red for 1 damage to target creature or player. So you're going to be drawing a lot of lands anyway. You might as well make them do something, right?
Right. And then, of course, we mentioned you have a way to revive those lands.
Yeah. And these are both super grindy. Raven's Crime, you can just do it turn 1 and just go, all right, every turn, as long as I can, I'm just going to keep you off playing any cards. And, if you can kind of force your opponent into top deck mode, there's value in that, right?
Right, your control deck.
Yeah. Next, we got 4 copies of Chainer's Edict, 1 in a black. Target player sacrifices a creature. Flashback, 5 in black. It's just pretty good removal. It's not been so great. Good. Yeah. It's kind of in the past, probably 4 or 5 months, kind of been on the downturn in terms of, is this actually good anymore?
Getting to disagree with you like I do every week, but sure.
I think it's still good. I just don't think that it's I don't think it's like one of the champion removal spells of the format anymore. Next we got Grim Harvest.
We have opinions.
I know. I've got a lot of opinions.
Well, you actually missed a retrace spell, Siphon Life.
Oh, that's true. 2 copies of Siphon Life, 1 black. Target player loses 2 life, you gain 2 life.
It's basically Tendrils of Agony, guys.
It's basically manual Tendrils of Agony that you have to pay for every time. Yes. But moving back to CMC order, we've got Grim Harvest, instant, 1 in a black, return a creature from your graveyard to your hand, recover 2 in a black. Every time something dies, you got to pay 2 in a black or it gets exiled. But if you pay the 2 in a black, it goes back to your hand.
Right, and this helps us rebuy some of these creatures that we don't have a lot of, and so we make up for that by having Grim Harvest.
Yeah, just lets you get real grindy. Next, we got Mulch. 1 in a green. Reveal the top 4 cards of your library. Put all lands revealed this way into your hand. The rest into your graveyard. So potentially 1 in a green, draw 4.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, in reality, the thing is, we've got enough stuff that's interacting with the graveyard here that Mulch kind of is draw 4 at times. It's not always going to be the best, but it sure does help you hit land drops early on, and it sure does let you refuel late game.
Right.
Next, we've got Strangling Soot, which I'm going to have to look up here to read off properly. Strangling Soot, 2 in a black. Destroy target creature with toughness 3 or less. Flashback, 5 in a red. So this is a conditional black removal spell that has flashback on it, but it is targeted. 2 copies of this. I could probably see this being traded out for something else, just because that toughness 3 or less does kind of irk me, right? It doesn't hit your Spire Golems. Doesn't hit most of Infinity
that well.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's definitely a little bit a little restrictive.
I forget though, this may have been a deck that was fiddled with while Drake was still in the meta. So
oh yeah, I think it was.
Something to bear in mind. Next we got 3 copies Pulse of Marasa, 2 in a green, instant, return a creature or land from your graveyard to your hand, gain 6. We sure have a lot of creatures. We sure have a lot of lands. Gaining 6 is just fine. Let's do this.
Right, and this also fits in the same sort of role as Grim Harvest, where it lets us recur stuff if we need it, especially lands. Like being able to get the land is huge in a deck that's titled lands, right? So
yeah. Next up, we've got Last Rites, which again is another one where. Let me just make sure I got this one exactly correct.
It's a spicy little number.
2 in a black.
It's a spicy.
Sorcery. Discard any number of cards. Target player reveals his or her hand. You choose a non-land card from it for each card discarded this way. That player discards those cards. So it's a symmetrical mind twist sometimes.
But you're ditching your lands, which you can get back later.
Yeah, or if you've got the Grim Harvest in hand, you ditch everything except that, and you get back your creatures later. This is sometimes just turn 3. Both of us are just going to go into top deck mode, and that can be backbreaking for some decks. Rounding out the spell suite is 2 copies of Evenkar's Justice, 2 black. It deals 2 damage to each creature and each player. Buyback of 3. This does kill a lot of our stuff, right? Or a decent amount of our stuff. It kills the Seers and it kills the Crypt Rats. The rest of the stuff in the deck dodges it, and this kind of counts as another win con, right? Because we've got the Pulse of Marasa to kind of stabilize and keep it an okay life total.
Right, and it's one of the closest things we have to an actual board wipe.
Yeah. And that with Crypt Rats, that there's a decent amount of mileage for wrathing even larger boards late game. But that's the surprisingly short number of non-lands. For the actual lands in the titular lands deck, we have, I'm going to run through this one real quickly, 3 copies of Barrenmoor and 3 copies of Tranquil Thicket. These are the Onslaught cycler lands. So they each tap for a color and they cycle for one of that color. Barrenmoor is the black one. Tranquil Thicket's the green one. We've got 1 copy of Bajuka Bog. It's a black land. ETB is tapped. When it ETBs, target player exiles their graveyard. We've got a copy of Haunted Fengraf. Taps for colorless. 3 generic, tap sack. Get a creature card back at random from your graveyard. We've got 3 copies of Ash Barrens, the new fetch land from Commander 2016. Taps for colorless, and it also has basic land cycling for 1 generic. Then we got 2 copies of Jungle Hollow, the green-black gain land. 3 copies of Golgari Rot Farm, the green-black bounce land. 1 copy of Rugged Highlands, the red-green gain land. 1 copy of Bloodfell Caves, the red-black gain land. 2 mountains, 4 swamps, 3 forests.
3 barks, 2 yips, and a wolf.
Yeah, it's it's a very intricate mana base, and one of the big things about it is, you want your lands to do things, and unlike Legacy, we're not putting a Pendrell Veil onto the board, or making a Dark Depths token. Yeah, we're dealing with a lower power level here. So we've got some card draw, we've got some utility in the bounce lands so that we can rebuy things like Bajuka Bog or the gain lands, or even Ash Barrens to go cycling
or
for
you
colored.
Can cycle. Yeah, or you can draw a card off your Barrenmoors or Tranquil Thickets.
Yeah. And for the sideboard, do we really want to cover the sideboard, or do we want to get into our very overblown discussion topic for today? Because I keep worrying we're not going to have enough time for this.
Let's just quickly run through the sideboard. I'll do it with us. We owe it. We got 3 copies of Ghastly Demise. They're going to be used against aggro matchups, and we're filling up our bin. We have an extra Evenkar's Justice. We have 2 copies of Ancient Grudge, which are probably against Affinity or other artifact-based decks. We have 3 copies of Pyroblast, which are useful against mono blue decks, including Delver or maybe Is It Fairies. We have 2 Brindleboars, which help us deal with other aggro decks, and we have 4 copies of Wickerbat Elder to also help deal with artifacts.
Wow, that was impressive. Quite quick. So we don't actually have a price on this one this time. It's going to be right. This is going to be medium pricey in both paper and online because you got the Crypt Rats and Pyroblasts online,
right?
And
right.
then in
those
paper,
are going
to
to run you a little.
Yeah. But our discussion topic for today, in case the deck choice didn't give it away, is mana bases and how to build them.
One of the reasons we decided on this deck is because it has a hugely intricate mana base. Working in Pauper, you have to work around the restriction that most if not all, I'm sure there's one I'm not thinking of because it's Magic, of the fixing lands come into play tapped. And so you have to work around this huge drawback that's not present in other formats.
Yeah, so you could create a mana base, right? If I'm playing a white-black deck, I could just put swamps and plains into it. And that'd be fine. I can produce the 2 colors of mana I need. But the trickiness comes when, you need when you have sort of a sequence of events you want to unfold. Like if you want to be able to hit a turn 1 white source, a turn 2 black source, and then like a turn 3 black source, you're going to have to tweak your mana base a bit to kind of optimize how you're going to get that. So obviously starting first are basics, and the big advantage is they come into play untapped, and there's a lot of cards that interact with them either based on their specific type, their land type, or the fetches get them. That's the big thing, right? We don't have access to Polluted Delta and all its siblings, so we're kind of stuck with our first class of lands, the fetches. So we've got Evolving Wilds and Terramorphic Expanse, both of which just ETB untapped, but you tap them, sacrifice them, get a basic out of your deck, put it into play, tapped. They're functional reprints. They've got the exact same wording on them. The only real thing is, which art do you prefer more? Because we don't have... Is there any card in Pauper that lets you name a card? Like a surgical extraction?
That's a rare effect, because the only ones I'm thinking of are there's surgical, there's infinite obliteration, there's pithing needle, there's Phyrexian Revoker, but no, I don't think so really.
Yeah, so it really just comes down to which art do you prefer and not much else. And these for a long time were kind of these, and the panoramas were the only ones that were available. The panoramas are a cycle. They're from Alara Block, which was shard based, right? Yeah, they're called shards.
Yeah, that's the shard one. Yeah,
which is 3. If you flip over Magic card and you look at the back, you'll see that little pentagram of colors, and it's 3 of them that are touching. So, for example, Esper is white, blue, black, and Grixis is blue, black, red. And each of these fetches, basically, it can either tap to add a colorless to your mana pool, or you can pay 1, tap, sacrifice it, and search up one of 3 types of basic lands which correspond to a shard. Sorry. And this is an incomplete cycle. We don't have the wedges, the ones where 2 allied colors and their shared enemy. But where do you come down on the panoramas?
Dude, why would you play them? They don't do anything that you can't do with another card, and they're more restrictive. I don't see any reason to play that card.
Well, okay, so let's introduce the last factor here. Ash Barrens taps for colorless and has basic land cycling 1.
Yeah, now, that's way better.
Well, hear me out here. The panoramas, if you play them early game and you don't have a way to bounce them to your hand, they can be fixing in the late game. Okay. I'm not going to go to the ends of the world to argue that the panoramas are relevant, but I don't think they're like heinously worse than Ash Barrens.
Okay.
So when do you want these in your deck?
I feel like we talked about this before the show.
I mean, so each of these fetches up basics. So you want a deck with a high count of basic lands, and on top of that, you want to not, because let's say for sake of argument, you have 20 land slots. It kind of, if you have a full play set of Evolving Wilds in there, you kind of only really have 16 mana sources. So fetches in general, especially Evolving Wilds and Terramorphic, you're going to want them in decks where you want a lot of basics because you have turn 1 plays that you care about, aka your Delver of Secrets, your Disfigures, your what have you on turn 1. But you also want to be able to fix into a second color at a later point in the game. Whereas Ash Barrens can be a mana source early, but if you draw it late game, it can be a mana source of a specific color. So, Ash Barrens and the panoramas kind of fit a little bit better into the late game control decks that really need to maximize the amount of mana they can get if they have every land on the battlefield, right?
Right.
And those are our fetches. You can run up to, actually, I guess technically with the panoramas, you can run 32 different fetch lands.
Right. But it's just like, why would you?
Yeah, you really you probably want one or two full play sets of these at any given time, and if you're getting close to 8 of them, you might want to back off and reconsider. Also worth noting, Evolving Wilds, while this isn't dreadfully relevant, can double trigger landfall abilities on creatures because it'll enter the battlefield, and then when you sacrifice it to search for another land, that one enters the battlefield. Kind of niche, but worth mentioning.
Definitely.
In monocolored world, we've got the cycling lands, and we talked about Barrenmoor and Tranquil Thicket, and those are the onslaught block ones where, Barrenmoor, for example, is ETB taps for a black, has cycling of black, and there's a full cycle of those, one for each color. But there are also the Urza's Saga cycling lands. Urza's Saga was the first time cycling showed up.
Right.
And those are all the same, except the cycling is too generic. And I think the only time I've ever seen them played is in Tron, right?
Yeah, because most decks just can't afford that cost.
Yeah, with most decks, if you have cycling lands in there, I feel like they're more likely to be in one of your dominant colors versus a splash. Whereas the older Rugtron decks kind of just needed card draw sometimes and didn't care too much about a tapped colored mana source. Right. And right now I'm trying to think what tiered decks are playing cycling lands. Is Koldatha Boros still playing them?
Yes. They play the red one and the white one. And then I'm trying to think of other decks that might play this. The thing is, most monocolored decks don't really want to play them. Burn sometimes plays the red one, although I don't know. Forgotten Cave, I'm not ever sure that's 100% correct, but they do. But it's definitely good in the kitty style decks. And yeah, there's I'm going through my head. I don't think even most of the control decks play them. Like maybe one or two.
In general, I kind of associate this much more with aggro decks in non-blue colors, just so
that they have because card draw is such a premium.
Card draw is at a premium, and also late game, paying 1 mana to kind of redo your draw when you're like needing to draw into some action is pretty good. To the point where you don't even care that much about the rare occurrence where you have an ETB tapped land turn 1. Also, synergizes well with anything that bounces it back to your hand late game, so you can cycle it. Right. Next, we got the artifact lands. There is a cycle from Mirrodin, starting with Ancient Den, ending with Tree of Tales. 1 for each color. They just tap for a color, and they happen to be artifacts. And where
obviously
would these go?
Really good in Affinity.
They are actually part of the
obviously
reason.
Really good.
They're part of the reason that Mirrodin Standard was so terrible.
Right, because you could sacrifice an Arcbound, you would Disciple of the Vault. It was just bad.
Yeah.
Bad times.
We don't talk about those days. But these also show up in some other decks, There was a day where, the Koldatha deck was Jeskai instead of just Boros. And actually, does the Boros one still plays them too, right? Because it needs Metalcraft.
Because, yeah, of course. And it combos with Glinthawk and with Floaty Goblin card, Koldatha Rebirth. That's it.
There we go. I just wanted to see how long it would take for you to remember the namesake of the deck.
Explodey Goblin card, that one,
But outside of that, unless you have stuff that cares about artifacts, these are really much more of a liability than anything else because yes, they come in untapped, but they sure do get eaten by Gorilla Shaman and Ancient Grudge, and boy, land destruction can feel terrible sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a thing. I don't know. You can't think about it too hard.
Oh, worth noting, there is also a colorless one, Darksteel Citadel,
Which is
um,
indestructible. Thank you
which
very
is
much.
indestructible, which is a very, very weird and powerful effect. But those are the artifact lands. Play them in Affinity. Probably don't play them anywhere else unless you have a way to fetch them up, or like most decks that I've seen play Trinket Mage play a couple of artifact lands because sometimes you need to ramp. Um, and then the only other decks are yep.
People used to play them to tech against Mind Wrench or Wrench Mind rather.
Yeah.
Because you could just discard it, but now that mono black is sort of on the decline, people don't do it so much.
It did actually. I think it was today. I think I saw a mono black list in the 5.0s, alongside some other interesting things. Not to detour too hard here, but a couple weeks after we talked about Delver Fiend and or is it Blitz or whatever you want to call it, and Angler Delver, both of them placed 5.0 today.
Yeah, people want to prove us wrong. That's fine.
Yeah, I always say, prove me wrong. I'll be happy to listen. But moving on from the artifact lands, we got kind of a weird one here, the depletion lands. These are a Mercadian Masks special. There's one for each color. They come in with 2 depletion counters on them and come in tapped. And they have the ability to tap, remove a depletion counter from this land, add 2 mana of the matching color. So, for example, Peat Bog is the black one. So it would add black. And then when there are no depletion counters on this land, sacrifice it. We had a local player play this, and I forget why.
I don't know.
I want to say it was Nick.
It was probably like Turbo Reanimator.
Yeah, it does put in work in that list. I want to say that he was running them in like a land destruction brew or something, where it was like just turboing out land destruction a turn earlier.
That sounds like Nick. I bet that's what happened.
Yeah, I remember. I want to say I remember seeing him playing against someone in like Hickory Woodlot, Forest, Thermokarst turn 2, and then win somehow.
Nick, you crazy bastard.
Next on the list, not technically a monocolored land, but I kind of felt that they needed to get mentioned up top. The Urza's lands. The Urza's lands are really, really good. They're good enough to build a modern deck around. They also only produce colorless. So this, when you look at Tron, you kind of have to really think to yourself, how do I counteract the fact that I'm going to be producing this absurd amount of colorless mana with the fact that I need to cast spells that aren't artifacts and Eldrazi? So generally, you'll see these alongside a bunch of gain lands. In older variants, you saw it alongside the Urza's cycling lands. Usually accompanied by artifact mana fixing. They're really good. Do you got anything to add about the Urza's lands?
I think they tap for multiple mana and are colorless.
Yeah, I'm actually
really. I mean, they do good things.
I'm actually kind of shocked I've never seen you play Tron and Pauper. Just because I know how much like in Legacy you play Eldrazi, which is a colorless deck that produces colorless mana and cheats on mana. And in Pauper, you enjoy playing Affinity, which also cheats on mana. I'm kind of surprised that you've never picked up a Tron variant.
I played a little online. I'm not really as much of a control player is really the reason.
Well, there is the green-red Tron that just kind of seeks to turbo out big things. I don't know. I'm just saying, maybe give it a whirl. The Chronicles ones are dirt cheap. And I think that's like the only expensive part of the deck, right?
Right. I think so. I have most of them.
Yeah, I was going to say. Next, moving into duels. We don't have good duels. Like, that's definitely one of the defining things about Pauper.
most played ones are, of course, the Khans gain lands, which gain a life, and then the Karus, which you can use to bounce things. Although not the actual cycle of Karus. Karu is actually terrible because you have to bounce a plains back to your hand, and then it taps for white and a colorless. The Ravnica ones are much better.
Oh, sir, I believe you forgot a word there. You have to return an untapped plains.
Yeah, it's not great.
Well, I mean the big advantage with these is, you know, you can have, if you have a deck with 20 lands in it and 4 of them are Karus, you technically, if you get every land on the battlefield, can produce 24 mana. And also there's the neat trick of, you know, with a cycling land, you can tap it for mana, Karu it back to your hand, use the mana you're floating to cycle it.
Right. It's pretty good.
And they also let you abuse ETB effects on lands, like your Bajuka Bogs and some other characters we'll get to later in this list. And then we've got the gates from Return to Ravnica. There's one for each color pair. The ETB tapped, and they have the subtype gate, which is largely useless. There's like one cycle, I think, of creatures that care about gates, right?
Right, and then of course in regular Magic, in Standard there was the Mazes End combo.
Oh yeah, always forget about Mazes End. What a weird card. But recently we got in Oath of the Gatewatch and Shadows over Innistrad, there was an uncommon cycle, including I want to say a Meandering River and Foul Orchard and Stone Quarry, but they're all just ETB tapped duels. And they were printed out uncommon, but recently Wizards has been doing the Planeswalker decks, which kind of replaced the intro decks. And slowly they've been downshifting them. So right now we only have the red-white one, the blue-black one, the white-green one, and the blue-green one. But hopefully they eventually get all 10 of them. I think I read a press release when they first announced the Planeswalker decks saying that they intended to make sure that all 10 were in Standard at once. Like once they'd phased them all in, there would always be kind of this affordable mana option for players on a budget. So these are pretty far down the list though, because the gates at least have some interaction with other cards. The gain lands gain you life, and the Karus do something on a completely different axis. So when do you play duels in our format?
Mostly when you're playing a deck with 2 colors.
Well, I mean 3 color decks still play them, but
right.
I was talking
3 is kind of.
Oh no, go ahead.
3 color decks are kind of hard. What were you asking me really with that question? Go ahead.
Well, I was kind of getting to the point of generally if you have, let's say you're playing a white-red deck and you have, you know, a full complement of the gain lands and the gates. So you have 8 lands that enter the battlefield tapped.
You want to play them as soon as possible unless you have to do something that turn.
Yeah, and also you've got to like realize that at some point you're going to have that opener with the one land hand that does not let you have a turn 1 play.
Right,
for some decks that's important, right?
Yes, very much so.
That said, the gain lands still see a lot of play. The more decks are running them, the worse time a deck like Burn has, because you know they don't matter a whole lot, but they matter just enough that like 2 of them put you, because Burn, you know, is usually dealing damage in increments of 3. So 7 lightning bolts is 21 damage, and if you can get if you can gain 2 life off gain lands, you effectively make them find another burn spell in order to kill you. So
right, so they're really powerful there.
Yeah, not nothing. When we get into stuff that produces more than 2 colors is where we start to get into weird options. You want to take some of these?
Sure. So first off, we have Crumbling Vestige, which is enters the battlefield tapped land. However, it does make a color of mana of any color of your choice the turn it comes in, and then on subsequent turns it taps for colorless. So the first time around, it's pretty good. You can use it to fix any color, but then after that, you're kind of sunk. So this is paired best with Karoo lands, just so that you can, get a little engine going here. And I don't really see this being that popular. Most of the time, it's just better to not like the upside of being able to tap for two different colors whenever is better than getting that one burst of color. But I have seen it in like Reality Acid,
Oh, really? Oh,
which
because you have
yeah,
so
because it is a
many.
lot of ways to return it to your hand.
Yeah, I was gonna say like you have enough ways to bounce it back and get that trigger again. That's kind of neat.
Uh,
They did a really gorgeous F&M promo of this that I think you have 4 copies of, even though you've never played it.
yeah, dude. Of course, it's great promo.
Oh yeah, no,
Um,
I don't know if you noticed, they've been knocking it out of the park, and I really want that Aether Hub promo for what is it, June or something? Looks
yeah, dude.
gorgeous.
They have some good ones.
Although this month's
Um,
is terrible, if I remember correctly. It's what is it, Fortune's Favor, or
I don't know.
it's.
I haven't been playing, so.
Oh, that's fair. That's fair. What do we got next?
We have Shimmering Grotto and Unknown Shores, both of which are essentially Prophetic Prism on a land. You don't draw the card, but you tap it and another one in order to make one land of any mana of any color. These are traditionally played in Tron decks who have an overabundance of colorless mana, but have few ways to fix it into the colors that they need to actually make their deck function. And so you'll typically see one or two of these in the Tron deck. And since there's Shimmering Grotto and Unknown Shores, you kind of get to pick and choose what art you want, but they do functionally the same thing. Personally, I play the Unknown Shores from Theros because, seashells.
I'm gonna have to disagree with you on that one and say Shimmering Grotto from Lorwyn.
That's because you're old school and you like creepy light trees.
Actually, I really like the art in Lorwyn, except for like the fact that it was like a brief period where magic artists were told not to draw faces that look like real human beings, and I don't know. I like the whimsy of that plane, and hopefully we return there someday. Um, yeah, these are good in Tron. I don't think I've ever seen another deck play them, to be completely honest.
Oh, it's
Because
really only good if you have an abundance of colorless mana that you need turned into colored mana.
yeah, and in other decks, where you want the fixing, you're probably just going to want to play Prophetic Prism just for the card draw, and
Right.
the fact it's an artifact in a lot of decks. Um,
Right.
Next up, what do we got next?
Rupture Spire and Transguild Promenade. Nobody really plays these cards. They're into
They're
the
pretty
they,
garbage.
they intertapped, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
And
they enter tapped.
you have to pay one the turn they come in or sacrifice them. So, but they do tap for any color. So there
Mhm.
is that. But you have to take a whole turn off to play it. So they're not great.
Well, let me hit you with this. Compare them to Shimmering Grotto or Unknown Shores, where you have to pay every time. Like I'm not talking about putting this in a Tron list. I'm talking about like if you really had a need for something that produces like 3 colors of mana and you didn't really care about your turn 2. Actually, no,
Your
never mind.
rainbow
I,
land.
I, I just said something very stupid. So moving on.
Oh, we're just gonna pretend we didn't hear that now.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on. Sure. Holdout Settlement, the Springleaf Drumland. You tap it and another creature in order to add one mana of any color to your mana pool.
And I'm kind of surprised we've never seen this one. It seems like
Well,
there's got to be a
play
deck
Springleaf Drum
somewhere.
and Affinity.
Yeah, it can't. I don't think it replaces Springleaf, but it just feels like one of those cards where like there should be a deck that needs a bit of weird fixing and has enough creatures that it doesn't want to attack with that it might like this. It does tap for colorless as well, which is important. Like you don't have to have a creature. But yeah,
Right.
holdout settlements. It's a little weird. And last up, we've got a spicy thing from years gone by.
Invasion and Invasion Cycle. The Tri-Sack lands. Let me give you an example of one with the title Irrigation Ditch. It is a picture of an irrigation ditch. Irrigation Ditch comes into play tapped. Tap. Add white to your mana pool. Tap. Sacrifice Irrigation Ditch. Add blue green to your mana pool.
Yeah, so each of these is formatted. It has a main color, and then it has that color's two allied colors. So it always taps for the main color, and you can tap and sack it to add both allied colors.
Now,
Um,
I will say, I think I have seen the Jund one played before. Geothermal Crevice.
I have seen it played in Turbo Reanimator. I don't know where
Okay,
you
that
saw
makes
it.
sense. That's probably where it was. Because then you can you can turbo out something, and it just has for normal mana until the turn you're ready to do that. Unlike the depletion lands where you have to always take a counter off of them.
Yeah, they're kind of interesting. I've heard tell this was obviously before either of our times in the format that these used to be in Storm because you just needed a lot of mana to go off, and this was a way to do it that was quick and dirty. But
Yeah, well, when you're not planning on seeing another turn, it doesn't really matter.
exactly, you're willing to burn any resource you need to as long as you win that turn. So yeah, they're kind of neat. And unlike a ritual effect, you can't really counter these in our format. So they've got that going for them. And our last section here is just kind of utility lands. We've got Bajuka Bog, which we already talked about. Taps for black, comes in tapped, and when it enters the battlefield, you exile target player's graveyard. I really love this card. I actually just like full on. I think it's great in the format because if you can say I'm willing to have an ETB tapped black land, it sometimes just ruins your opponent's day.
You'd be shocked how many decks are okay with having an ETB tapped black land.
Yeah, like if you're on the slower control plan, like this, it's hurting you a very small percentage of the time, and it's helping you in a major way a very small percent of the time. But when it helps you, oh my goodness, like I've played against like tortured existence lists with this, and even just like the incidental value against like a teachings list where you just go, all right, you've got enough stuff in your graveyard, play my Bajuka Bog now, and for no mana I have exiled 8 different things.
Yeah, it's so strong, especially when you pair it with Karoo lands.
Oh yeah. Nothing is better than, I definitely have fond memories of Bajuka Bogging someone who was on Reanimator. And this was in paper. And then later, after he'd managed to build up some more stuff in his graveyard, I played a Karoo land, got back the Bajuka Bog, and he just looks across the table. He's just like, "You're a terrible person." And I'm like, "Yep, yep." I acknowledge this.
You always
yeah.
shame your opponents.
Oh no, it was Ian. It's a friend. But Bajuka Bog, real good. Sometimes it just gets your opponent game 1. Sometimes it's just an ETB tapped land. Not much else. Next we got Kabira Crossroads. Also ETB is tapped, and you gain 2 life when it enters the battlefield, and it taps for white. This used to be in Reality Acid when that was still like a deck that put up numbers, and Koldatha Jeskai. Really
Radiant
best when you
Fountain
can.
is
Yeah. Radiant Fountain has kind of replaced it now. Taps for colorless, but doesn't enter tapped.
right.
And is the Koldatha Boros list running this right now?
Oh, it plays Radiant Fountain.
What?
It plays Radiant Fountain.
Yeah. So Kabira Crossroads kind of a thing of the past. Radiant Fountain is, our new replacement, if you will. We've got Colony Garden, taps for green, ETB's tapped, and when it enters the battlefield, you get an O1 plant token. This has seen play in Boggles or Hexproof or whatever you want to call it, because it works really well against Edict effects. Anything else?
Card.
Yeah.
There's also Mortuary Mire. Moving on.
Yeah.
Mortuary Mire, when it enters the battlefield, lets you put a creature from your graveyard on top of your deck. I actually think this card is really terrible. I understand that people play it, but I don't like that it puts it back on top of the library. It seems so bad.
I'm going to hit you with a slightly reversed opinion. I think it's terrible when people include this as an off-color land, which I have seen people do. I think that's just
Yes.
wrong.
Agree.
I don't hate it when it's, on color. Like if you're already playing black, like a bad raised dead on a land that your opponent can't interact with easily is not the worst. Um, but we've gotten through all of these, and let's talk about like mana bases. So in Pauper, generally, how many lands are you going to want to run?
Typically between like 17 to 20, depending on your deck.
Yeah.
Not we're not a very mana intensive format. Even the control decks don't really want to play more than like 21 lands, whereas in other formats that number might be as high as 24.
Yeah, we definitely run a little lean on the mana stuff just because, the other cards are going to be lower impact, and I think that's a big factor. If your cards are lower impact, you want to be able to draw more action and less lands. That said, I
Definitely.
think some decks get dangerously low. I think I saw Stompy the other day was running 16 lands, and generally I'm not comfortable going lower than 18 in pretty much any deck. Where's Affinity at these days? Is it like 16?
It depends on your build, but yeah, thereabouts. Some people like I like to splash like a couple extra um off color lands. I think I like more like 17 or 18.
Yeah, because that's already a deck that mulligans pretty heavily due to low
It's not
land count.
it's not very good at mulliganing though.
But so generally you're going to want to be somewhere in the 17 to 21 give or take range. Obviously, the deck that we talked about this week is kind of an exception because it's got interactions with extra lands, so it doesn't really care about flooding out. But flooding out when you really need to draw some action is terrible in this format. It's terrible in any format, but I feel like since Pauper is kind of a game of inches a lot of the time, flooding out for a turn or two can just be lights out.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, definitely. It's so dangerous. Um Most decks in the format will take those if you lose the momentum, they'll just run all over you.
Also, I'm gonna just toss out something that popped into my head. We do not have a whole lot of activated abilities in this format on
No,
creatures.
we certainly do not.
So
And
you don't have a whole lot of mana sinks, right? So, drawing those extra lands doesn't even mean, oh, well, okay, I guess I can activate this and hold up a spell. It's just, oh no, I have extra mana and I still only have this one piece of interaction.
yeah.
Um, in terms of tapped lands, the big important thing is how many turn one plays do you have? If you have a lot of relevant turn one plays, you should be running as few tapped lands as possible because, say it's really important that you hit Delver turn one. You really don't want to have that one land hand where the only one is a tapped land. You generally want to be able to say, I want, you want to cast your spells when they're best versus saying, I'm going to play a turn behind because I want to make sure I have perfect mana. Well, that's great, but if you're playing a turn behind the whole game, you're probably losing.
Right. Like
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, play your lands, you dummy.
Yeah, you probably should. I have a question for you, and I don't think I've ever talked about that you with this. When you start flooding out, do you keep playing lands if your opponent is not on a black deck with chittering rats? Are you the type that like to sandbag lands to bluff the interaction?
No, and that's also because I play affinity, and so you want to have your lands played out.
Okay, that's fair because of the you want to be able to ATOG for more, but like in Koldatha Boros, your other deck that you love to death, is that one that as long as you can fairly surely know that your opponent is not going to cast Chittering Rats and lock you, do you ever sandbag non-cycling lands?
I do sometimes. I'm not really one of those people though. I don't know. I'm just not very good at Magic, but I'm not really that into withholding lands.
the whole mind games aspect of your land
Yeah, and
drops.
I get why people do it, and I think there's a time and a place for it, but like I think some people put way too much stock in quote unquote giving their opponent information. And like there are some times where it just doesn't matter if the land is in your hand or not, right? Like if you're at three, like let's picture this scenario. If you're at 3 life and your opponent has a lightning bolt and you're playing mono blue and you have an island in your hand and you're bluffing counterspell, like how much good does that really do you? You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah, that's definitely one of those cases
Like
where they're
if your
going to run it
opponent is
out no
good,
matter what.
like if your opponent is not good, but fairly confident in the game, they're probably going to decide that in most cases it's better for them to just go for it. And if you have an answer, you have an answer. But like I don't know, maybe that's just my style of playing Magic. But I think that the gain is so incremental, and I get it. Every increment helps you win the match. But I think some people do stuff like that because they see like professional players doing it, and they think, like, oh, that's a thing that you should do to next level your opponent, and it's like it just doesn't matter 99% of the time.
Well, I will say that since I've been playing a lot more limited lately, there's definitely a lot of value there in withholding lands because, after like land 6 or 7, most of the time it doesn't matter the extra lands you're drawing. And I definitely feel like, given the fact that, draft decks are a little bit more inconsistent, your opponent is kind of priced into thinking about all the combat tricks you could have in your colors. But I definitely am pretty much on the same page as you. I generally do not hold lands back, especially because like if you're playing a deck with a bunch of ETB tapped lands, like get those out on the battlefield so you can use them the next time they're untapped.
Right,
Like,
exactly. I don't think it's ever correct to hold the tapped lands.
oh no, no, no. And the only time I'd say I might consider holding a land is a cycling land, and even then I'm more likely, like, if I'm hellbent, I draw a cycling land and I can cycle it, I'm probably going to immediately. Just so I can redo that draw, because I might get something at sorcery speed that I can't cast if I do it at the end of my opponent's turn.
Right,
Um,
exactly.
but yeah, just when you're building your brews, be aware of all your options. Be aware of what you need to take into consideration. Like, do I need to be able to cast a land? Do I need to be able to have untapped lands turn 1? Or do I maybe not care about having untapped lands turn 1, but I'd really like them turn 2? That sort of thing. Like, make sure that you're not. If you include too many ETB tapped lands, you're always going to play a turn behind, and your turn 3 answer is probably not lining up well with your opponent's turn 4 threat.
Right.
So be aware. And, we're by no means experts. We've given some pretty simple advice, and this is more kind of a review to get information out there. But maybe we'll have someone on in the future who can talk more to this with an expert eye to detail, because I am
Are you
definitely like,
saying what I think you're saying?
we might have a guest on the show. Yeah. Just a matter of figuring out how to handle that. But I don't know. I definitely think this is one of those things where people could definitely sometimes stand to improve, and there are definitely some people who have this all figured out. Um, but remember, there's more than one way to skin a cat. Um, and on that morbid note, do you want to take us out here, Adrian? It's been almost an hour of this.
Sure. Thanks for joining us today. Please check below this video or the description of this podcast for details on where to find us. We'd like to remind you that if you're listening to this on a platform with reviews, they're always appreciated as they boost our visibility. If you have a deck list or idea for a topic, feel free to contact us via either via our website or by emailing us directly at colorcommentary@gmail.com. Special thanks to Pat's Games and L. Till next week, this is Adrian and Mike, and we are signing off for Color Commentary.